According to legend, when God created all the peoples of the earth, he ordered them to come to him at a designated hour to receive a piece of land on which they were to live. The people of Georgia arrived late, when all the land had been distributed. God shook his head and frowned. "Why are you so very late?" he asked. The Georgians replied, "O Lord, we were having a banquet in your honor. We began to toast your name, and of course we began to sing, and with all our songs ringing out, we lost track of time." God took pity on the Georgians and said he would give them the one place on earth that he'd been saving for himself. Nestled in the Caucasus Mountains, this was a land of incomparable beauty, Georgia. For the Georgians, singing is in the blood, and it's thanks to singing they have a place to call home. I'm a singer and a song collector, and I'm about to set off on a journey to a true singing nation. Georgia is a treasure trove of ancient polyphonic singing styles, 12 distinct regional varieties of which have been preserved. Bordered by powerful neighbors, including Russia and Turkey, Georgia has been persistently attacked and invaded over the centuries. Its traditional songs variously suppressed and banned, its singers threatened with exile and even death. Despite this oppression, a rich stream of traditional singing persists, thanks in part to the efforts of the musicologists and song collectors who have documented oral traditions in order to save them from extinction. For singer and musicologist Nana Mjavanadze, it's thanks to her singing culture that Georgia has endured against the odds.
For a small nation like Georgia, this togetherness and integrity is probably existential. We survived over centuries and maybe thousands of years. Very, very difficult history, I would say from time to time tragic. And the many ancient nations faded away. And we sort of managed to adapt the different stages of the history. And singing probably was one of the instruments to maintain this integrity and stand up to the obstacles and overcome these obstacles. When we Georgians start to sing, we are desperate to have others to join and help us to form this one whole and to provide this completeness, which you can't do it with one voice. And that's how it helps the integrity of the society, which has been threatened for centuries by different enemies, and which is crucial to survive.
The central feature of Georgian chant is polyphony, which sees multiple melodies interacting across three parts to form harmony. Here's the first voice. And then the second voice. And finally the bass part, often performed by several singers. The end result is a complex, beautiful, and sometimes disorientating concoction. Georgia has a rich tradition of ancient folk songs, and these predate the arrival of Christianity and are an integral part of rituals that are said to appease powerful spirits, bring about healing, and even control the weather. To find out more about these songs, I've come to the State Museum of Georgian Folk Songs and Musical Instruments here in Tbilisi to meet Kashveti Church. She's a musicologist who's been travelling to remote regions of Georgia to record authentic traditional singers since 1975. She's also an expert in the rituals that accompany many of these old songs.
Hello, how are you?
The museum is a wonderland of ancient instruments, and Ketavan proceeded to introduce each one like a proud mother showing off her offspring.
I want to show you some things here which are very, very important for our musical culture.
A flute made from a swan's bone.
Now, here we have pan flutes, and see here, please. In many countries...
A harp that summons up spirits.
This is from Raja, high mountains, very nice place.
And a spectacularly discordant music box. After Ketavan had completed the tour, one of her choirs, Ensemble Miceli, strode in. They specialise in recovering lost folk songs and began to sing an old shepherd's chant. Ketavan explained that this song, Samaya, forms part of a ritual which allows the singer to connect with the underground spirits of the earth. Miceli went on to perform mythological songs, medicinal songs, and old wine-making chants, at times forming a circle, arms linked, wheeling round, their legs overlapping with intricate steps. After their performance, I spoke to singer Mamuka.
This is the real Georgian folk singing, and when you sing these songs, when we are learning it from old recordings which Ketavan she has stored, we can feel the energy of our ancestors who were singing. It's coming from our genetics.
So I'm just coming out of the State Museum of Georgian Folk Songs and Instruments, and I must say it's not very often that one goes into a museum in the middle of the day, broad daylight, and hours later into the darkness you are spat out, bathed in music, like the whole museum came to life for us with song after song. And it's so brilliant to see an institution so alive and so thriving with so much humility and humanity in it. There's an undeniable power in these old Georgian folk songs, with their links to ancient rituals and beliefs. Nana Mrzavanadze told me that if I wanted to hear more of these age-old songs, she knew just the family. And in the back of a taxi creeping through the Tbilisi traffic before winding up a steep dirt track that left our driver cursing under his breath, she explained that the Chamgelianis are a famous singing family from the remote mountainous region of Svaneti in West Georgia. They come from one of the last remaining villages where traditional folk singing is a way of life. So we've just arrived on the top of a mountain. Looking down in the distance is Tbilisi, and the taxi driver's leaving us in the dark in this little dirt path in this sort of compound of what looked like fields and a few goat houses, and we're going to kind of stroll into the darkness and find the Chamgelianis' house, and I hear they've laid on a bit of a feast and we'll have some songs for us.
One of the Chamgelian sisters. Her name is...
I was led into a dining room with a table laden with fruit, plates of quail and salted fish, bowls overflowing with walnuts, cabbage, beetroot, and sparkling pomegranate seeds. After toasting with some delicious homemade Georgian wine, it didn't take long for the singing to begin. Gathering round the roaring fire, Nana and the Chamgelianis sang a folk song that was said to control the weather. Nana told me about the ancient songs that are said to heal the sick. It turns out that even to this day, in remote parts of Georgia, families treat children suffering from whooping cough or measles using elaborate healing rituals, accompanied with songs that appease the sickness-causing spirits known as the Bata Nebi. Have you any stories that you could share with us about the use of healing songs in your family?
My son, when he was 1.5 years old, he had this whooping cough, and my grandmother was terminally ill, and at that time I thought she could not recognize us anymore because she could not remember names. And when we were with my children up in the mountains, my son was suddenly, his illness got so complicated and he got so bad that he lost consciousness, and I had to urgently bring him down to the town, to the hospital. And on the way I was checking if he was still breathing. I was not sure he would survive the journey.
With her son in the intensive care unit, Nana paid a visit to her grandmother and poured out her feelings, despite the fact she believed the old lady could no longer understand her.
I was crying and I was telling this story, what happened to Data, and she was looking up with completely blank eyes, and suddenly she started to sing. This was the healing song which she would sing to me and to my sister. I got numb. I did not believe that she was singing this song, and she understood what I was telling her. And 3-part songs can't be sung just in one voice. So I joined her and I started to sing another part, and my grandfather also joined us, and he started to support us with bass voice. And 3 of us, we were singing. I was crying because it was so difficult for me and so emotional to see her hardly managing but still forcing herself to sing. And my grandfather also could not believe that she was doing that, and he also was crying. 2 of us. She did not cry. She wasn't crying at all. She was just looking at us with these blank eyes, and she started to make up new verses mentioning my son's name. So she was praying for my son, and actually my son was out of the hospital next morning, and she died 2 days later.
After countless songs and many toasts, we sat down to enjoy the feast, when suddenly the door burst open and in strode 7 young men from the prestigious group Adile. They'd heard the BBC were in town and had ventured out in the middle of the night to find us. They sung a stunning collection of old work songs, including a display of yodeling that I'll never forget. Well, after a riotous night of singing and a lot of toasting into the small hours with the Chamgelianis, I'm ready to experience a slightly more meditative form of Georgian singing. So I'm standing outside the beautiful Kashveti Church here in the heart of Tbilisi, and I can hear that a service has just started. Inside, huddled worshippers watch on as priests in brightly coloured robes process in and out from behind a golden rood screen. To the side, a choir interject with chants that seem to drift upwards towards the ceiling. Georgia has a wonderfully rich tradition of liturgical chanting. Orthodox Christian services like this are completely sung. The priest or deacon intones their prayers, and the choir responds in 3-part harmony. It's said that the 3 parts of the polyphonic chant coming together as one represent the Holy Trinity itself. These sacred melodies were passed down through oral transmission over countless years. It's said that they were inherited directly from God via worthy scribes and singers in ancient times, and so they're considered infallible and sacrosanct. By the late 19th century, the master chanters who'd memorized all three voice parts for thousands of chants were beginning to die out before they could teach the next generation. Aware that the liturgical chants were at risk of extinction, a group of Georgian nationalists set about transcribing these ancient melodies for the first time. To find out more, I met musicologist John Graham at the National Centre of Manuscripts in Tbilisi. We strolled through the centre until we reached a room filled with countless volumes of manuscripts and sacred texts, bound in huge books. While the transcribers of the late 19th century managed to notate and preserve much of their nation's sacred chants, the Georgian liturgical singing tradition was about to face a new threat. In 1921, the Soviet Red Army invaded Georgia, installing a Bolshevik regime bitterly opposed to the church and its music.
Starting in 1921, we have very, very active suppression of the Georgian Orthodox Church. They're murdering clerics and destroying churches, and anyone affiliated with the church was liable to just be beaten up by young thugs who were infused with the Bolshevik movement, and there were no repercussions. So it was a very, very dangerous time to be a nun or a monk or a priest wearing any type of clerical garments or looking in any way like a church figure.
And to what lengths did some of those keepers of the liturgical tradition go to protect their music?
Well, these very manuscripts that we're looking at right here, they were inherited by one of the young workers that worked in the press here in Tbilisi. And he has all these manuscripts and no one else seems to care. And he knows it's a treasure. So what does he do? He dedicates the rest of his life until 1944 to protecting these manuscripts, and really did so at the risk of his own life. And his story reads like an incredible action novel. And he spends years and years recopying these rough drafts into good copy tomes like this. Look at this massive tome here, the dates printed on the top, 1900 to 1932. He worked on it for 32 years.
This brave man, whose name was Kashveti, eventually became a priest and then a monk. Kashveti wrote in his memoirs that the other monks would come to him and say, "Father, what are you doing up all day and night hunched over your desk? What is it that you're working on that has you so obsessed?"
He responds with that quote, "If you only knew what a God-given treasure I'm working on, I so unworthy. I can't give enough hours to this incredible tradition." So it seems like the monks around him were just oblivious to the importance of this music. He alone knew its importance. So he's at Gelati Monastery when the Bolsheviks expel everyone from the monastery under threat of exile to Siberia in 1923. But he can't just get up and walk out of there. He's surrounded by the massive piles of these manuscripts. So he had to hire a horse cart and take all of these manuscripts and hide them in the basement of a friend in a local town. In 1924, then, he moves all the manuscripts back to East Georgia and lives on a mountaintop monastery outside of Tbilisi here. And it was during that time that he writes in his memoir that he buried the manuscripts in tin boxes in the yard, just in case Bolsheviks or thugs would come and kill him, the manuscripts would be safe. Because in his own writing, he says, "This is a treasure that I'm not worthy to be working on. This is the wealth of the entire Georgian nation. Centuries of chanters have passed down these melodies, and it's all been entrusted to me, the lowly servant of God." These kinds of quotes are written in the margins of these manuscripts.
In 1936, Kashveti finally agreed to pass the manuscripts over to the director of the National Art Gallery in Tbilisi, who promised to archive them and store them safely.
They put them in the University Museum, which ended up becoming this Kekalizze National Center of Manuscripts that we're sitting in right now. And that's why these manuscripts survived. They get into this museum archive in 1936, and they stay here untouched for 50 years. And it was only in the late 1980s that singers from the conservatory found out about these manuscripts, and they were able to come study them and start to sing these chants again. And that started the revival period that we call the post-Soviet revival of Georgian traditional chant, which is really started in 1988 from these manuscripts written in the 1880s. And now they're being published for the first time. And lots of young choirs are recording these chants on CD, and we're in the midst of a major revival of this traditional repertory.
He's like the Noah, really, of Georgian music.
It all came down to him.
Yeah.
It's like one person. I mean, if he'd failed anywhere on this track, we would not be holding these manuscripts.
I'm high up on a hillside, looking down out over Tbilisi, and behind me is the stunning Kashveti Church, and inside it is Malkaz Svaneti. He's a renowned choir director and one of the key figures of the post-Soviet revival of sacred chant in Georgia. He's here rehearsing with one of his choirs, Sakioba. During a break in the rehearsal, I sat down with Malkaz. Malkaz, it's fascinating to hear the story of the suppression of the singing, and I wondered if you could tell us a bit about your experiences of what happened to the music under the Soviet era and that suppression of the songs.
During Soviet Union, it wasn't supportive environment, particularly for chanting church music, because it was actually banned. They were hostile to any religions present in the countries of Soviet Union.
And for those who did sing those songs, what was the consequence of being caught? What were they at risk of losing or happening to them?
If you were trying to revive or try to spread the chants, you may be imprisoned for this. If somebody was famous, they might even kill him just to show off the highest level of the punishments. If you're lucky enough to be somebody living in the village and they caught you in one case, they might only give you not as strict punishment as this one, but I mean, they could easily send you to Siberia, for example. That was very easy for them to decide, and to kill you as well. That was easy for them to decide, unfortunately.
So Malkaz, in the Soviet era, when these songs were suppressed, not allowed to be sung, how were they thought about, talked about? How were they sung? Were they practiced? Was there an illicit singing of them that existed?
People found solutions, as it always happens. So the first type of the solution was that they went to underground and they were having sacred gatherings and they were just feeding themselves while they were hidden. And the second one was when they wanted to chant, they were changing the content of the chant. So nobody would understand it was a chant, but melody was for chants. So they would change the wording. And if somebody hear it, it wasn't theological text anymore. For example, there was a sentence, apostle chosen by Christ. And people made this apostle chosen by people. So they've changed Christ to people, so nobody could blame them.
Malkaz was one of the revivalists who took the manuscripts, once buried underground, and began to rekindle a musical tradition that had virtually been extinguished during the Soviet reign. To the young men of his choir, Malkaz has become the songmaster, teaching them the intricacies of this extraordinary vocal style. Whilst he's modest about his own achievements, Malkaz is clearly proud of having played a part in the preservation of this once endangered musical tradition.
These chants were passed through generations by memory, so it wasn't recorded as such. It was just passing from one generation to another unbrokenly by heart. And then we realized that there was a gap, there was a chain break of 1 century almost. And we managed to restore this broken chain and the connection to the ancestors that is great feeling, not only for me but for all Georgians who now know for sure that this gap wouldn't happen anymore, because this is now well recorded, at least. The consciousness and identity of Georgian people is well preserved and well transferred through folk music and church music, chants. So this is really essential for Georgians to be revived, and for non-Georgians as well to learn about true Georgians.
As a singer and song collector, I've spent my life seeking out tradition bearers who link us to the ancient oral culture of our ancestors. It's been a profound honor to spend time amongst the Georgians, a true singing people whose national identity is founded upon their songs sung so passionately with character and connectedness. The story of both the pre-Christian ritualistic folk songs and the sacred chants of the liturgical tradition is one of death and rebirth, and ultimately survival. For lovers of traditional music, Georgia provides a pristine example of a nation where the fight to save a once endangered music has been won. Not only is the singing of Georgia surviving the homogenizing effects of modern music, coupled with a steady decay of traditional village life, it's seen off the oppressive brutality of the Soviets and is finally starting to thrive again. The booming popularity of Georgian traditional singing internationally, with choirs popping up all over Europe, the US, and beyond, is a testament to the inherent greatness of this music. To be here and embraced by these inexplicably unique and mysterious polyphonies, one can only gasp at the millennia it's taken and human ingenuity invested to evolve them into these works of art.